I am 68 years old. I am a widow who sacrificed absolutely everything, even my own flesh and organs, to keep my only son out of a federal prison. Tonight, the very boy I bled for is throwing me out into the freezing snow like yesterday's garbage. The brutal Chicago wind cuts right through my thin wool coat, chilling me down to my fragile bones. I stand shivering on the icy driveway, watching a waking nightmare unfold. My son Marcus and his wife Chloe are tossing my belongings into cheap black trash bags and hurling them out the front door. The plastic bags hit the frozen concrete with a sickening thud, bursting open and scattering my life across the snow. Just 3 years ago, I made a choice no mother should ever have to make. Marcus had embezzled $200,000 from his employer. He was facing years in a maximum security federal prison, a sentence that would have completely destroyed his life and taken him away from his young son forever. So I found a shady underground broker. I literally sold my own right kidney to pay off his massive debt and buy his freedom. It was a brutal, illegal surgery in a makeshift clinic that smelled of bleach and terrible secrets. My body has never fully recovered from that severe trauma. I live with constant radiating pain deep in my side, and my daily energy is a mere fraction of what it used to be. I endured all of that agony because he was my child. I gave away a piece of my own body because I loved him unconditionally. Tonight, standing on the porch of the house, I helped them buy. Marcus refuses to even look me in the eye. He stands cowardly behind his wife, his face a mask of cold indifference. Chloe crosses her arms against the winter chill and looks at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. She tells me that I have outstayed my welcome. Marcus finally speaks up, his voice devoid of any warmth or gratitude. He calls me a toxic financial burden. He says my medical bills and my constant need for rest are draining their family, and they simply cannot afford to house me anymore. The sheer indignity of his words paralyzes my heart. My own flesh and blood steps back inside the warm, brightly lit hallway. He pushes the heavy oak door shut. The finality of the deadbolt clicking into place echoes through the freezing night air. I fall to my knees on the icy driveway. My trembling, arthritic hands desperately try to gather my scattered heart medication from the deep snow before the moisture ruins the pills keeping me alive. The humiliation burns hotter than the harsh winter wind. Suddenly, the front door creaks open just a crack. My 7-year-old grandson Leo pushes his way forward. His small face is red and stained with hot tears. He reaches out his tiny hand, trying frantically to give me a crumpled piece of paper. He is sobbing, calling out for me, but before his fingers can even brush against mine, Chloe's manicured hand snatches his shoulder. She yanks him backward into the house with terrifying force and slams the door shut again. With no other choice, I gather my ruined bags and drag myself down the dark street to the corner bus stop. The icy metal bench offers no comfort. I sit there shivering violently, pulling my thin coat tighter around my aching body, wondering how I will survive the night. Then the silence of the empty street is broken by a sharp buzz from my coat pocket. My frozen fingers fumble to pull out my old cell phone. It is an automated bank alert. A sudden deposit of $10,000 has just been made into Marcus's old joint checking account. It is an account my name is still on, one he swore to me he had closed over a year ago because they were completely broke. I stare at the glowing screen as the freezing wind howls around me. If my son and his wife are so financially ruined that they have to throw a sick elderly woman into the street, where on earth did that massive deposit just come from? The freezing wind whipped at my coat as I dragged my broken life away from the house I helped buy. I had nowhere else to turn but my church. It was past midnight when I knocked on the heavy wooden doors of the parsonage. Pastor Thomas and his wife, Sister Sarah, took me in without a second thought. Sister Sarah set up a small cot for me in the administrative office, right behind the sanctuary. She wrapped me in warm blankets and brought me a cup of hot tea. her eyes full of pity. I thanked her, but the humiliation burned hot in my chest. A 68-year-old woman sleeping on a church floor because her own flesh and blood threw her out like trash. The physical pain in my side where my kidney used to be throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the gnawing, restless instinct growing in my mind. I lay awake in the dark office, listening to the old building settle. Sleep was impossible. My mind kept looping back to that automated bank alert on my phone. $10,000 deposited into an account Marcus swore was closed. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The bright screen illuminated the dark room. I opened my banking app, my fingers shaking as I typed in my old password. I had not checked this joint account in over a year because Marcus told me it was draining fees and he had shut it down. The screen loaded. My breath caught in my throat. The $10,000 was sitting right there in available funds. But that was only the beginning. I clicked on the transaction history and started scrolling back. The screen revealed a trail of massive wire transfers. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. The deposits were regular, arriving like clockwork every single month. I scrolled faster, my heart pounding against my ribs. I went back 1 year, then 2 years, then 3 years. I scrolled all the way back to the very beginning of the deposits. The first massive wire transfer was dated the exact same week I lay bleeding on a dirty table in an underground clinic, giving up my kidney to save my son from prison. The dates lined up perfectly. The very week I sacrificed my body to pay off his $200,000 embezzlement debt, a sudden stream of untraceable wealth began flowing into his account. The pieces of the past 3 years started to shift and rearrange themselves in my mind, forming a terrifying new picture. 6 months after my brutal surgery, while I was still struggling to walk and drowning in medical debt, Marcus and Chloe took a lavish 2-week vacation to Dubai. They came back with designer clothes and glowing tans. When I asked how they could afford such a trip after almost going to federal prison, Chloe smiled that sweet fake smile and said her wealthy uncle had paid for everything as a stress relief gift. I lay on the church cot and stared at the ceiling. Her wealthy uncle had died penniless 10 years ago. I remembered attending the funeral. Why did I never question that lie? Family history suddenly stopped making sense. How did a man facing federal charges for stealing corporate funds suddenly have pristine credit? How were Marcus and Chloe driving brand new luxury vehicles just a year after being supposedly bankrupt? Embezzlement charges ruin your financial life forever. You do not just bounce back and buy a Mercedes. My hands trembled as I opened my email app. I searched for the old messages Marcus had forwarded to me 3 years ago. The terrifying emails from his former employers, the corporate lawyers, threatening him with immediate federal prison time if the $200,000 was not paid back in full. I found the old folder where I had saved them. I opened the most threatening email, the one that finally broke my heart and pushed me to contact that illegal organ broker. I looked closely at the sender details. I tapped on the email address. The address ended in a corporate domain name. I copied that domain name and pasted it into a web browser. The search results came back instantly. The company domain had expired and been completely defunct for over 5 years. Those lawyers did not exist. The corporate email was a forgery. The threats of prison were completely fake. A cold sweat broke out over my entire body. I had been tricked. My own son had orchestrated a massive, elaborate lie to steal from his own mother. He had manipulated me into selling a piece of my own body for a debt that never even existed. Morning light eventually broke through the stained glass windows of the church office. I got up from the cot, my body aching but my mind crystal clear. I needed to see my grandson. I needed to see Leo. I walked to the corner bakery and bought his favorite blueberry muffins. I took a bus to his private elementary school, hoping to catch him during his lunch break. When I arrived at the front office, the school principal, Mr. Harrison, greeted me with a warm smile. He knew me well from all the times I used to pick Leo up. We started chatting, and Mr. Harrison smiled broadly. He told me I must be so proud of Marcus's new business venture. I asked him what he meant. Mr. Harrison chuckled and mentioned that Marcus had just been in the office yesterday afternoon. He said Marcus had just paid Leo's private school tuition for the entire year in full. Mr. Harrison lowered his voice and said it was quite a sight, watching Marcus pull $40,000 in pure cash out of a leather briefcase. $40,000 in cash. Yesterday afternoon. The very same day they threw me out into the snow, claiming they were too broke to feed me. I stood there in the school office, clutching the bag of blueberry muffins, feeling the ground completely drop out from under my feet. What is really going on? Sunday morning brought a strange kind of peace to the church grounds. The administrative office had been my sanctuary for the past few days, a quiet place to hide from the freezing Chicago winter and the devastating reality of my shattered life. I knew Marcus and Chloe dropped Leo off at Sunday school every single week. It was never out of a genuine desire for faith, but rather a convenient way to get an hour of free childcare while they went to their luxury brunch. I volunteered to help with the children's ministry that morning. My side ached with a dull, familiar throbbing, but the desperate need to see my grandson was vastly stronger than any physical pain my old body could feel. When the heavy wooden doors of the classroom finally opened, my breath caught in my throat. Children poured into the room, smelling of fruit juice and crayons, their laughter echoing off the painted walls. And then there he was, my sweet Leo. As soon as his bright, clear eyes found me standing across the room, his face lit up with a joy that pierced straight through my shattered heart. He broke away from the group of other children and ran to me as fast as his little legs could carry him. He threw his arms around my frail waist, burying his face deep into my skirt. I sank to my knees right there on the carpet, completely ignoring the sharp protest of my missing kidney, and held him as close as I possibly could. He smelled of fresh soap and the sweet innocence that his parents had not yet managed to destroy. I held him tight, savoring the pure warmth of his small body against the cold, harsh reality of my current life. He pulled back slightly, looking around the busy classroom, with a cautiousness that no 7-year-old boy should ever possess. When he was absolutely sure none of the other adults were watching us, he reached deep into the pocket of his little corduroy trousers. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling with a secret and heavy importance. "I saved this for you when Mommy threw your stuff away in the snow." He opened his tiny fist. Resting in his palm was a thick plastic band. It was definitely not a child's toy. I reached out and picked it up. The plastic was heavy-duty, the kind meant to withstand water and wear. It was a VIP hospital bracelet. My fingers traced the smooth edges as a wave of absolute confusion washed over me. I had not been in a normal hospital for years. I looked closer at the thick white band. My full name was printed across it in stark, undeniable black letters. But it was the logo printed brightly above my name that made my blood run completely cold. It did not belong to the grimy underground clinic Marcus had driven me to 3 years ago. The logo was an elegant gold crest, stamped with the words, St. Jude's Concierge Medical Center. It was an elite private hospital located on the wealthy side of the city, a place where billionaires, celebrities, and politicians went for discreet, extreme luxury medical care. A place that charged hundreds of thousands of dollars just to walk through their heavily guarded front doors. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. 3 years ago, Marcus had driven me blindfolded in the back of his car. He told me the cartel brokers demanded absolute secrecy, or they would kill us both. He told me the clinic was a dirty, hidden basement operation to avoid the police. He said he had to protect the black market doctors, who were risking everything to take my kidney and pay off his massive embezzlement debt. A terrifying cold fear washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. My hands shook so violently that the thick plastic bracelet rattled against my gold wedding ring. I brought the bracelet closer to my eyes, desperate to make sense of the impossible reality staring back at me. Right below my name was the admission date. It was the exact date I gave up my kidney. The exact same day I supposedly lay on a filthy table in a hidden, terrifying basement. Beside the date was the attending surgeon's name, Dr. Alistair Vance. My mind reeled, struggling to process the conflicting realities crashing together in my head. It was not an underground clinic at all. I had not been operated on by a black market butcher with dirty tools. I had been admitted to one of the most prestigious and expensive medical facilities in the entire country. I flipped the heavy plastic bracelet over. On the back, stamped in small but incredibly clear type, was a patient identification number and a long billing code. Below those numbers was a line of text that made absolutely no sense at all. Billed to the Sterling Trust. I stared at the words until they blurred before my eyes. What was the Sterling Trust? Why would a massive financial trust fund be paying for a surgery that Marcus claimed was a desperate, illegal trade to save his life from federal prison? The pieces of the puzzle began to violently shift. The $40,000 in cash at the elementary school, the monthly wire transfers of thousands of dollars into Marcus' closed bank account, the luxury cars, the Dubai vacations, none of it came from an underground broker. It all pointed to something much darker, something perfectly legal on paper but entirely evil in practice. I kissed Leo on the forehead, forcing a smile, and promising him I would see him again very soon. I waited until the Sunday school class was over and retreated back to the small church administrative office where I had been sleeping. My hands were still trembling uncontrollably as I opened the web browser on my old cell phone. The internet connection was slow, but I typed the name Dr. Alistair Vance into the search bar. The results loaded on the screen, and the breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. Dr. Vance was not a shadowy criminal hiding from the law in a basement. He was a world-renowned transplant specialist. His professional profile picture showed a distinguished man in a pristine white coat, standing in a state-of-the-art laboratory. The medical articles beneath his name detailed his groundbreaking work, performing life-saving organ transplants exclusively for ultra-wealthy clients from around the globe. He was a billionaire surgeon for billionaire patients. I dropped the phone onto the wooden church desk, my entire body trembling with the weight of the betrayal. Marcus did not sell my kidney to a cartel to pay a debt. He sold my kidney to a billionaire. But the most terrifying question of all echoed in the silent room. If I was in a luxury hospital operated on by a world-famous transplant surgeon, why do I vividly remember a dirty clinic? Why do I remember the overpowering smell of bleach, the flickering broken fluorescent lights, and the filthy blindfold? What did my own son do to my mind to make me believe a nightmare while I was actually sleeping in a palace? I spent 30 years as a high school counselor in the Chicago public school system. My entire career was built on noticing the things people tried to hide from the world. I knew how to read between the lines, how to spot a desperate lie, and how to piece together broken stories to find the ugly truth hiding underneath. I spent decades analyzing behavioral patterns and saving vulnerable teenagers from terrible, abusive situations. But I never imagined I would have to use those exact same investigative skills to examine the darkest and most evil actions of my own son. Sitting in that quiet church office, the heavy plastic bracelet from St. Jude's Concierge Medical Center burned a hole in my pocket. The bitter humiliation of being thrown out into the snow just days ago was entirely gone now. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, and righteous focus. Every answer I found only created a darker and more terrifying question. If Marcus did not sell my kidney to a black market butcher to save his own life from a federal prison sentence, what exactly happened to my body 3 years ago? I needed concrete proof. I needed an undeniable paper trail that no one could argue with. I packed my small bag, thanked the pastor and his kind wife for their incredible hospitality, and walked out into the freezing city. I was no longer a helpless and discarded elderly mother weeping in the snow. I was a furious woman on a mission to reclaim her stolen life. I took the city bus to the most affluent side of town, where the towering glass facade of St. Jude's Concierge Medical Center loomed against the grey winter sky. The building looked much more like a 5-star luxury resort than a place of healing. Valets parked expensive luxury cars, while men in tailored suits and women in designer coats walked through the gleaming, revolving doors. I pulled my thin wool coat tight around my aching body, lifted my chin, and walked straight up to the massive marble front desk. I placed my Illinois state identification card and the heavy plastic VIP bracelet directly onto the pristine counter. I looked the receptionist directly in the eye and demanded my complete medical file. I told her I was transferring my care to a new specialist and required every single page of my admission records, surgical notes, and billing history from my stay 3 years ago. The young woman looked at my worn clothes with a clear hint of elite disdain, but she could not argue with my official identification or the authentic concierge bracelet sitting between us. She typed rapidly into her computer, printed out a massive stack of confidential papers, placed them in a thick manila envelope, and handed them over without another word. I took the heavy envelope to a quiet corner cafe across the street, ordered a simple black coffee, and began to read. My hands shook as I scanned the thick stack of surgical notes. The truth was infinitely worse than any nightmare my mind could have conjured. The official medical records clearly stated that I was brought into the luxury facility completely unconscious and unresponsive. According to the toxicology report from my admission blood work, I had been given a massive and incredibly dangerous dose of hallucinogenic sedatives several hours before I ever arrived at the hospital doors. Marcus had drugged me. My own son had deliberately poisoned my mind with chemical hallucinogens to make me hallucinate the dirty walls. The terrible smell of bleach and the terrifying cartel members threatening our lives. He orchestrated an elaborate chemical nightmare, so I would never question where I truly was or what was actually happening to my body while I was under the knife. I flipped frantically to the billing section at the very back of the folder. I expected to see a massive mountain of debt placed under my name, but the account balance was absolute zero. I traced my trembling finger down the long, itemized list of charges. The elite surgical suite, the world-renowned transplant specialist, the luxury recovery room, the intensive care staff, and the post-operative medications. The total cost of the surgery was a staggering $2.5 million. And right at the bottom of the final page, printed in bold, clear black ink, was the payment confirmation. The entire $2.5 million medical bill had been paid in full in pure cash wire transfers by a corporate entity called the Sterling Trust. The cold, paralyzing fear in my chest hardened into a righteous and burning anger. I packed the papers back into the envelope and marched straight out of the cafe, heading directly to the downtown public library. I sat down at one of the free public computers and typed the Sterling Trust into the search engine. I spent 2 solid hours digging through public court records, corporate financial filings, and old local news articles. Finally, a face appeared on the bright monitor that made my breath catch in my throat. Richard Sterling. He was a prominent local tech billionaire, a man who owned half the commercial real estate in the city and ran multiple global technology firms. I clicked on a local news article dated exactly 3 weeks after my surgery. The headline read, "Local billionaire Richard Sterling makes miraculous recovery after life-saving kidney transplant. The article detailed how Sterling had been on the absolute brink of death, waiting years on the official organ transplant list, until a sudden and anonymous donor match saved his life just in the nick of time. He bought my kidney. Marcus sold my vital organ to a dying billionaire who simply bypassed the waitlist with his massive fortune. I sat in the quiet library, staring at the smiling face of the billionaire, who was currently walking around with my stolen organ functioning inside his body. Marcus did not just lie to me about being in trouble with the law. He harvested his own mother's body for unimaginable profit, while pretending to be a terrified, desperate victim facing federal prison. I needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly how much my son had traded my flesh for to this billionaire. I remembered an old family tablet that Marcus had left at my house years ago. He had given it to Leo to play games on, but when they threw me out into the snow, the tablet got tossed into one of my black trash bags. I rushed back to the church office and dug frantically through my scattered belongings until my fingers brushed against the cold metal device. It was completely dead. I plugged it into the wall charger and waited an agonizing 10 minutes for the screen to light up. It was still connected to Marcus' old cloud account. I stared at the passcode screen. I knew my son perfectly well. He was incredibly arrogant, but fundamentally lazy when it came to security. I typed in his birth year and the word money. The screen unlocked instantly, granting me full access to his digital life from 3 years ago. I opened the messaging application and began to scroll down, swiping past months of mundane conversations until I reached the dates corresponding to my surgery. There it was. A long, detailed text thread with an unsaved phone number simply labeled medical broker. My heart pounded violently against my ribs as I read the sickening exchange. The broker provided highly detailed instructions on which specific sedatives to use, how to dissolve them into my evening tea, so I would not taste them, and exactly what time to deliver my unconscious body to the private underground loading dock of the hospital. Every single detail of my trauma had been meticulously planned. Then I saw the very last message Marcus had sent to the broker. It was time-stamped right at the moment I was lying on an operating table having my body cut open. The text read, "The old lady is completely under the sedatives. She totally bought the cartel story. She actually thinks she is saving my life from prison. The delivery is complete. When do I get my $3 million payout?" The truth hits me with the force of a speeding train. The glowing screen of the old iPad illuminates the dark church office, casting long shadows against the walls. I sit completely paralyzed in the hard wooden chair. The core family secret explodes in my mind, shattering every single memory I have of the last 3 years. Marcus was never in debt. There was no massive corporate embezzlement. There were no terrifying cartel brokers threatening to break his legs or throw him into a federal prison. Every single tear he cried on my living room couch, every late-night phone call where his voice shook with fake panic, every desperate plea for me to save his life. It was all a masterfully orchestrated theatrical lie. My own son, the boy I carried in my womb and raised with every ounce of my strength, looked me directly in the eye and fabricated a nightmare to manipulate my deepest maternal instincts. He knew exactly how much I loved him. He knew I would do absolutely anything to protect him from harm. And he used that sacred, unconditional love to harvest my body for cash. The true secret is so evil it makes me physically sick. I scroll through the recovered emails and medical records, my fingers numb and clumsy. I find the exact timeline of his ultimate betrayal. Marcus had discovered that Richard Sterling, a local tech billionaire with a failing body, desperately needed a rare kidney match. Sterling had the money to bypass the official transplant waiting list, but he needed a willing donor with a very specific blood and tissue profile. Marcus did not just stumble upon this information. He actively sought it out. He saw a billionaire drowning and decided to throw him a lifeline made of his own mother's flesh. But how did he know I was a match? The answer makes me gasp for air. I remember the routine medical checkup. Marcus insisted I take a few months before my surgery. He had driven me to a fancy private clinic, claiming his new corporate insurance plan covered comprehensive exams for elderly family members. I remember the nurses taking vial after vial of my blood. I thought my son was just being overly protective of my health. I thought he cared about me. In reality, he was having me medically tested to see if my organs were a biological match for Richard Sterling. When the results came back positive, Marcus hit the ultimate jackpot. He brokered the sale of my kidney. He arranged the luxury hospital admission. He planned the heavy hallucinogenic sedatives to make me believe I was in a dirty underground clinic. He guilted me into giving up a piece of my own body to save his life from a fake prison sentence, while he actually sold my organ to the billionaire for $3 million. He traded my health, my comfort, and my trust for a mansion and a fleet of luxury cars. But why throw me out into the freezing snow this week? Why the sudden violent eviction from the home I helped them buy? I open a new tab on the web browser and search for recent news about Richard Sterling. The answer appears instantly on the screen, solving the mystery of my cruel eviction. An article from a local real estate blog shows that Richard Sterling just purchased a massive, sprawling estate in Marcus's highly exclusive gated community. The billionaire is moving into the neighborhood this very week. The sickening realization washes over me. Marcus was absolutely terrified. If I continued living in his house, it was only a matter of time before I went for a walk and saw Richard Sterling walking his dog or driving down the street. I would recognize the man from the local news. I would see the billionaire who miraculously received a kidney at the exact same time I gave mine away. I would put the pieces together. Marcus knew that keeping me in his home was a ticking time bomb, so he threw me out into the brutal Chicago winter. He discarded his sick elderly mother in the snow like a bag of garbage, all to protect his $3 million secret and his pristine country club reputation. My chest heaves as I dig even deeper into the iCloud account. I refuse to stop looking. I open the text message threads between Marcus and Chloe. I find messages dating back to the week of my surgery. Chloe knew absolutely everything. She was not just a passive bystander. She was an active, greedy accomplice. While I was lying in a luxury recovery room, heavily drugged and weeping for my son's supposed legal troubles, Chloe was texting Marcus links to real estate listings and luxury vacation packages in Dubai. She complained about having to pretend to be stressed around me. She mocked my ragged clothes and my tearful prayers. But the ultimate knife to my heart is waiting at the very bottom of Marcus's financial emails. I find a digital receipt for a bank transfer. The amount is $100,000. I look at the name of the recipient, and a cold, violent tremor shakes my entire body. David, my ex-husband. The man who abandoned Marcus and me over 30 years ago. The man who never paid a single dime in child support. I read the attached text messages, and the final piece of the puzzle falls into place. David had somehow found out about the massive payout. He had accidentally seen a hospital admission form or heard a rumor from an old family friend. David threatened to tell me the truth about the billionaire, unless Marcus gave him a cut of the money. My own son, the boy I protected from his deadbeat father for decades, paid David $100,000 to stay away and keep quiet. Marcus paid off the man who ruined my youth, just so he could continue harvesting my body and living his luxurious lie in peace. Total, absolute emotional devastation crashes down on me. The heavy church office spins around me. I grip the edges of the desk to keep from falling out of the chair. The pain in my side flares up, a permanent physical reminder of the organ they stole from me. I gave up a vital piece of my own body out of pure, unconditional, motherly love. I bled for my child. I suffered through years of chronic pain and fatigue, believing I had saved my son from a life behind bars. Instead, I was literally harvested. My body was treated like a bank account. I was dismantled to fund their designer clothes, their extravagant vacations, and their massive mansion. And when I became a liability, when my presence threatened to expose their sickening greed, they threw me out to freeze to death. The tears begin to fall. They are hot, heavy, and full of a grief so deep it feels like my soul is bleeding. I cry for the foolish mother I was. I cry for the son I thought I had raised. I cry for the agonizing pain I endured for a lie. But then, as I stare at the digital receipt bearing the name of the man who abandoned me, the tears suddenly stop. They dry up completely on my weathered cheeks. The crippling sadness evaporates, replaced by a fierce, protective, and righteous anger. It is an anger so pure and bright, it burns away all the fear and all the humiliation. I am not a victim anymore. I am not a senile old woman they can silence with a deadbolt and a trash bag. I am a mother who has been pushed entirely too far. I grab the USB cable from the desk and connect the old iPad directly to the church laser printer. I hit print on every single document. I print the text messages with the medical broker. I print the fake corporate emails. I print the bank transfers to David. I print the $2.5 million medical bill paid by the Sterling Trust. The printer hums to life, churning out page after page of undeniable, damning evidence. I gather the warm sheets of paper and slide them carefully into a thick manila folder. I button my thin wool coat and step out into the freezing Chicago evening. The wind howls around me, but I do not feel the cold anymore. I feel nothing but absolute determination. I know exactly where Marcus and Chloe are going to be tonight. It is the annual charity gala at their elite country club. They think they have won. They think I am shivering in a shelter too broken and confused to ever bother them again. They are wrong. The Whispering Pines, a country club, was a fortress of unimaginable wealth and exclusive privilege. Its towering wrought-iron gates and manicured winter lawns represented everything my son Marcus cared about. Tonight was the absolute pinnacle of his pathetic ambition. He was being officially inducted into the elite membership of the club, a highly coveted status he had purchased entirely with the blood money he stole from my body. Just 3 days ago, I was shivering in a thin coat on his icy driveway, begging for mercy, while he and his wife threw my medication into the snow. Tonight I was returning to their world to burn it all to the ground. I walked through the gilded double doors of the grand ballroom. I was no longer the broken, discarded old woman they thought they had erased. I was wearing my absolute best tailored church suit, a deep royal purple that commanded respect and projected undeniable authority. My spine was straight, my head was held high, and in my hands I tightly gripped a thick manila folder. Inside that folder was the undeniable proof of their crimes. Bank records, hospital admission files, and printed text messages that would destroy their perfect facade forever. I did not pause at the guest registry. I walked with such fierce, righteous purpose that the tuxedo-clad event staff simply stepped aside and let me pass. The grand ballroom was filled with the richest and most influential people in Chicago. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the round tables adorned with imported white roses. Waiters carried silver trays of expensive champagne through the laughing crowds. At the main VIP table sat the guest of honor for the evening. It was the local tech billionaire Richard Sterling, the very man who was currently living and breathing because of the organ my son had fraudulently harvested from me. Marcus was standing at the wooden podium on the main stage, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He tapped the microphone and began his induction speech. He spoke smoothly about hard work, traditional family values, and the importance of giving back to the local community. The sheer hypocrisy of his words tasted like poison in the air. I began to walk down the center aisle of the ballroom. My footsteps were silent on the thick carpet, but the sheer determination radiating from my posture made people turn their heads. The room was massive, but my eyes were locked entirely on my son. As I got closer to the front row, Marcus casually glanced up from his speech notes. His eyes landed squarely on me. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him as pale as a ghost. His arrogant smile vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Chloe, sitting at the VIP table next to the stage, followed his terrified gaze. When she saw me standing there in my royal purple suit, she let out a sharp gasp and dropped her champagne flute. The delicate glass shattered against the polished dance floor, but nobody paid attention to the noise. Everyone was staring at me. I walked straight up the short flight of stairs to the stage. Marcus was completely paralyzed by fear. He opened his mouth to speak to stop me, but no words came out of his throat. I stepped right up to the podium and firmly took the microphone from his trembling hand. I looked out at the sea of wealthy, confused faces. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in that massive ballroom. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small USB drive I had prepared earlier that afternoon. I turned to the audio-visual technician sitting at a small control desk beside the stage. I ordered him to put the drive on the main projector screens right now, in a voice that left absolutely no room for argument. The young man, too shocked to resist the authority in my tone, took the drive and plugged it into his laptop. Instantly, the massive banquet screens behind me lit up. The first image displayed was the official hospital billing record from St. Jude's Concierge Medical Center, clearly showing the $2.5 million payment sent directly from the Sterling Trust. The second image was the text message thread between Marcus and the illegal medical broker, negotiating the exact dosage of hallucinogenic sedatives to use on my body. The final message on the screen was massive and impossible to ignore. The text read, "The old lady thinks it is for the cartel. When do I get my $3 million payout?" A collective gasp of horror echoed through the ballroom as the wealthy guests read the messages in bright, undeniable letters. I turned back to the microphone, my voice echoing off the walls with righteous fury. I announced to the silent room that my name was not on their guest list tonight. I told them I was Marcus's mother. I explained how 3 years ago, my son told me he was facing federal prison for a massive corporate embezzlement. He begged me on his knees to save his life. He drugged me, blindfolded me, and convinced me I was in a grimy underground clinic, giving up my kidney to pay off his criminal debt and protect his family from cartel brokers. The crowd began to murmur in absolute shock. I pointed directly at the massive screens behind me. I told them there was no embezzlement. I told them there was no cartel. My son simply found a dying billionaire who needed a rare kidney match. He had me tested under the guise of a routine medical checkup, found out I was a perfect match, and orchestrated a massive theatrical lie. He guilted me into selling my body to save his life, while he actually brokered the sale of my vital organ for $3 million. He paid off my ex-husband $100,000 to stay away and keep quiet. I gave up a piece of my body out of pure, unconditional motherly love, only to be harvested for a mansion and a luxury lifestyle. I paused, letting the devastating truth sink deeply into the minds of everyone in the room. Then I turned my gaze directly to the VIP table. I locked eyes with the billionaire sitting right next to Chloe. "I hope my kidney is serving you well, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice cutting through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. "Because my son sold it to you through deliberate fraud, and just 3 days ago, He threw me out into the freezing snow to die. He discarded me like trash simply because you were moving into his neighborhood, and he was terrified I would recognize your face from the news and put the pieces together. Richard Sterling sat frozen in his velvet chair, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief and mounting horror. He looked up at the damning text messages on the giant screens, then back at me, then slowly turned his gaze toward Marcus. The truth of the illegal fraudulent organ transaction was crashing down on the billionaire in real time. He realized his life-saving surgery was built on the deception and abuse of a loving mother. Marcus stumbled backward away from the microphone, stuttering incoherently. He tried to raise his hands to defend himself, but his pristine reputation was crumbling into dust in front of the most powerful people in the entire city. The wealthy guests who had been applauding his induction just minutes ago were now looking at him with pure disgust and revulsion. People were shaking their heads and whispering harsh judgments. Chloe realized instantly that their luxurious life was completely over. She burst into hysterical tears, knocking over her expensive chair as she scrambled to her feet. She tried to sprint toward the back exit doors of the ballroom to escape the massive public humiliation. But before she could even reach the hallway, two burly country club security guards stepped firmly in her path, blocking her escape and crossing their arms. Down at the VIP table, Richard Sterling slowly stood up. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying fury. He did not say a single word to Marcus or Chloe. Instead, the billionaire pulled his cell phone from his tailored suit jacket, dialed a very short number, and demanded loudly to be connected directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The aftermath of the country club induction was swift and completely brutal. There were no dramatic escapes or cartoon villain speeches. Real-life deals in cold, hard facts, heavy steel handcuffs, and federal mandates. Organ trafficking and medical fraud are severe federal crimes in the United States, carrying mandatory minimum sentences that destroy lives forever. When Richard Sterling made that furious phone call from the VIP banquet table, he mobilized a legal machine that could not be stopped or bribed. Within 48 hours, federal agents arrived at Marcus and Chloe's front door. I was not there to witness it in person, but I read the meticulous and humiliating details on the front page of the local newspaper. Marcus was arrested on his own perfectly manicured lawn in the early hours of the morning. He was handcuffed in front of the very wealthy neighbors he had tried so desperately hard to impress. The charges read against him were absolutely staggering. Conspiracy to commit medical fraud, severe wire fraud, and illegal commercial organ trafficking. He had forged official medical documents to bypass the federal transplant waiting list, disguised a massive black market transaction through complex corporate shell companies, and intentionally drugged a vulnerable elderly family member across state lines. The sheer weight of the federal indictment meant there would be no easy bail and no comfortable way out. He was placed directly into a high-security holding cell, stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogance. The luxurious house of cards collapsed with terrifying speed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service moved in absolute synchronization to dismantle their stolen wealth. Every single bank account, investment portfolio, and retirement fund tied to Marcus and Chloe was frozen immediately. The extravagant lifestyle they had built on my stolen flesh evaporated literally overnight. Their massive suburban estate went into foreclosure within weeks because the mortgage had been paid using funds directly linked to the illicit $3 million kidney sale. Chloe suddenly found herself locked out of her own bank accounts, screaming at customer service representatives as her platinum credit cards declined at every single luxury store in the city. She desperately tried to seek refuge with the elite women she had spent the last 3 years trying to impress. But wealthy socialites do not associate with indicted federal criminals facing organ trafficking charges. Her country club friends abandoned her instantly, blocking her phone number and pretending they had never met her. In a frantic attempt to save herself from a prison sentence, Chloe filed for a rapid divorce. She claimed she was just a naive housewife who knew absolutely nothing about the dark origin of the money. But the digital footprint told a completely different and undeniable story. The federal prosecutors easily recovered the deleted text messages on her phone. They proved she was actively browsing luxury real estate and booking expensive vacations the exact same day my body was cut open. She was formally indicted as a willing and active accomplice to federal wire fraud. The shockwaves of the scandal radiated far beyond the criminal justice system. The congregation at our community church, the very people Marcus had charmed with his generous financial donations and charismatic smiles, turned their backs on him entirely. Pastor Thomas stood at the wooden pulpit on Sunday morning and delivered a powerful sermon about the horrifying reality of greed and the ultimate price of betrayal. The religious community that had once praised Marcus as a highly successful and blessed businessman now looked at his empty wooden pew with profound disgust. People who had shaken his hand and eaten warm meals at his dinner table felt completely violated. They realized his generous church tithes were paid with the literal blood money of his own mother. Furthermore, the federal investigation did not stop with Marcus and Chloe. Federal agents methodically followed the long money trail directly to my ex-husband David. The $100,000 hush money payment he had ruthlessly extorted from Marcus triggered a separate and severe federal investigation. David had spent decades running from his responsibilities as a father and a husband, but he could not outrun the federal government. He was officially investigated for criminal extortion and blackmail, facing his own lengthy prison sentence. The men who had treated my life as a financial transaction were finally facing the devastating, inescapable reality of accountability. Justice was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, methodical dismantling of their entire existences. 2 weeks after the arrest, my cell phone rang. The caller identification showed an automated message from the Federal Detention Center. I sat down in my quiet room, took a deep breath to steady my racing heart, and accepted the charges. Marcus was on the other end of the line. His voice was completely broken, devoid of any confidence or pride. The arrogant, wealthy country club member was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate man, weeping uncontrollably into a prison phone. He begged me for forgiveness, his words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. He cried that the country club lifestyle and the pressure to be wealthy had corrupted him. He swore that he was just blinded by pure greed and that he never truly wanted to hurt me. He begged me to speak to the federal prosecutor to tell them I had willingly given him the kidney to do absolutely anything to reduce his impending sentence. I listened to his voice crack and falter in the cold reality of his cell. I felt a profound, suffocating sorrow wash over me. This was my son, the boy I had loved with every ounce of my soul, the child I would have died for. But I did not offer him a lifeline. I did not promise to bail him out or cover for his evil, unforgivable crimes. My voice was incredibly steady and quiet when I finally spoke. "You took my kidney, Marcus," I said, letting the painful, undeniable truth ring through the phone line. "But you will not take my soul." I hung up the phone and permanently blocked the prison facility number. I sat alone in the silence of my room, staring at the blank, dark screen of my cell phone. I had finally reclaimed my dignity and protected myself from the very people who wanted to destroy me. The legal system was handling Marcus and Chloe, tearing down the luxurious lie they had built on my intense physical pain. But as the adrenaline of my righteous anger finally began to fade, a new and terrifying reality washed over me. Marcus was going to a federal prison for a very long time, and Chloe was facing years behind bars as his active accomplice. Their massive home was foreclosed, their bank accounts were locked, and their lives were over. My heart dropped heavily into my stomach, as the most important and urgent question of all struck me like a physical blow. With both of his parents facing federal prison sentences and his entire world completely destroyed, what happens to little Leo? The dust from the explosion at the country club eventually settled, leaving a quiet, enduring peace in its wake. Richard Sterling, the billionaire who had unknowingly received my kidney, was a man of surprisingly deep conscience. When the full extent of my son's evil manipulation was revealed to him, he was absolutely devastated. He could not stomach the reality that his prolonged life was purchased through the cruel exploitation of a loving mother. To clear his conscience and make genuine restitution, Mr. Sterling personally contacted his elite team of lawyers. He legally established a massive ironclad trust fund directly in my name. It was more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes, a legitimate fortune meant to ensure I would never suffer another day of financial anxiety. But I had no desire to live the way Marcus and Chloe had lived. I did not want a sprawling, echoing mansion or a driveway filled with useless luxury cars. Wealth without warmth is just another kind of prison. Instead, I used a small fraction of the trust to buy a beautiful, modest home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It has a wraparound porch, a spacious kitchen filled with natural light, and most importantly, a massive backyard with a sturdy wooden fence. That backyard was the main reason I bought the house. With Marcus and Chloe both stripped of their parental rights and serving lengthy sentences in federal prison, I petitioned the family court for permanent custody of my grandson. The judge, looking at the mountain of evidence, proving my absolute financial stability and my undeniable devotion, granted my request without a single moment of hesitation. Leo was finally safe. He was completely removed from the toxic materialistic world his parents had tried to build on a foundation of lies. Now the harsh, biting winds of that terrible Chicago winter are just a distant memory. It is a warm, brilliant spring morning. I sit on my new porch in a comfortable rocking chair holding a steaming mug of sweet tea. The golden sunlight streams through the green leaves of the oak trees, bathing the yard in a gentle glow. I watch Leo run across the thick, soft grass. He is chasing butterflies, his clear laughter ringing out pure and entirely unbroken. He is no longer a silent, fearful boy hiding in the shadows of an abusive home. He is just a child, thriving in a place where he is loved for exactly who he is. As I rock back and forth, a dull, familiar ache pulses deep in my right side. It is the permanent physical absence of my kidney. I know that phantom pain will never truly go away. It will always be there, a quiet, lingering reminder of the ultimate betrayal. It reminds me of the boy I raised, the boy who looked me in the eye and traded my flesh for a pile of stolen cash. But today, that pain does not bring me to tears. It just reminds me of my own fierce, unbreakable strength. Leo suddenly stops running. He crouches down near the edge of the garden, his little hands working carefully in the soil. A moment later, he sprints back up the wooden porch stairs, his face beaming with absolute joy. He reaches out and hands me a brightly colored, freshly picked yellow flower. I take the flower, pulling his small, warm body into a tight hug. I close my eyes and breathe in the sweet spring air. I survived the darkest, coldest night of my life. The brutal winter tried to bury me, but the warmth of the truth finally brought me back into the light.